So today, what I want to share with you is how I came to select this book, a little about the author, a very high-level synopsis of the important points to me in the story, and what I found compelling about the story, and why this book is an important addition to American history. And then we will have a Q&A. How did I come to select this book? That's really two questions. How did I select it for me to read? And then how did I decide that this is the one I wanted to present today? So I'm going to cover the first one. Last summer, I was in the bookstore and I spied this book on the shelf. And although I have read a lot about Teddie, I didn't really know much about Booker T. And his name is very famous. You see it on schools everywhere, but I hadn't read anything about it. So it was sort of the book selected me, and I grabbed it. What the author, Brian Kilmeade, I had not read anything he had written before. But when I started doing a little research, I found out he had previously written 5 other history books that were all bestsellers for the New York Times. So I picked it up. Just quickly, how many people have read the book? Just quick show of hands. Okay. This book is an easy read. It is a story about the two friends. And Brian's thesis is they blazed a path for racial equality. And he's also calling them both American icons. I think we all know Teddie was. But what about Booker T? He definitely makes a strong case that Booker T is definitely one of the most important icon that we have for his time in that part of the history of the U.S. This book is at least equal part a study in sociology as it is in history. It's about 2 individuals who become friends, how they met, how they became friends, how their friendship was tested, and how they sustained that friendship. This makes it a story that we can all relate to in our everyday experiences with our friends. There is a saying, there are friends for a reason, friends for a season, and friends for life. I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this story. I also want you to keep in mind, especially for those who've already read the book, that I'm going to share my interpretation of the story. I encourage each of you to read this book, if you haven't already, and form your own opinion of what is important in this book. I'm going to leave plenty of time during this presentation for there to be Q&A, and I'm hoping we have a really good discussion about the book. Next slide, please. Teddie was born into one of the richest and most respected families in New York City in 1858. And Booker T was born into slavery on a plantation in Virginia in 1856. Teddie was an outdoorsman, a political campaigner for the Republican Party, a war hero, But most of all, he was a reformer politician. Booker T was an educator, an administrator, a fundraiser, and a gifted communicator and orator. They were both about the same age. They were both writers, husbands, and fathers. Booker T, as a slave, dreamed of getting an education and becoming his own man. He accomplished his dream, and then he set about paying it forward. He wanted to provide an education to as many of his race as possible to open the door to them for the American dream. And he spoke constantly about bringing about better relations between white and black, and making himself an example of how to do that. Teddie wanted to live up to his father's legacy. His father was a very famous philanthropist in New York City. He was one of the founders of the Met. He was the founder of the Natural History Museum. He built an orphanage. He built a children's hospital. Teddie wanted to live up to his legacy. He devoted his political career to the betterment of the common man and improving the working conditions of the working class. He wanted to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, and he dedicated himself to setting an example of how to do that. Both prided themselves in being men of action. They were both saying, it's okay to have good intent, but that doesn't accomplish much. They did not meet until they were both in their 40s. After the Spanish-American War, Teddie returned from Cuba as a war hero, and he easily won the governorship race in New York. So he's the governor of New York. Booker T was the most respected black educator in America. He had become a spokesman for his race. He was the first African American to be awarded an honorary degree at Harvard. There was a reporter in New York City who knew both men, and he talked to both, encouraging them to meet each other. So they began corresponding, and Teddie invited Booker T to come to New York for a meeting. That first meeting went well, and their correspondence and meetings began to happen. As they were enjoying each other's company, they were building trust. And they began to recognize that they had shared goals. They saw the potential of having a bigger impact working together. Maybe they were becoming friends for a reason. As in many friendships, there are good times and there are challenging times. And there were two events that we're going to talk about that would severely challenge their relationship. The Republican Party nominated Teddie to be the vice president to run alongside McKinley for his second term. And Teddie's popularity aided to a landslide victory. After the election, Booker T sent a congratulatory note to Teddie, and Teddie replied that he wanted to meet as soon as Booker T came north again. And they made that happen in a couple of weeks. Teddie was thinking about the run for the next 4 years for the presidency, and he wanted to have a strategy for the South and how he could be successful in that campaign. Booker T wanted to invite Teddie to come to Tuskegee to see the experiment that he had created and what the results were that he was achieving. So now they had some common ground of how to move ahead. They did not know what was just about to happen around the corner. Within only a few months after that meeting, McKinley was assassinated. Teddie was sworn in as president on September 14, 1901. On that same day, he wrote one message that got dispatched to Booker T. And he said, "I want to see you as soon as possible to talk over appointments in the South." Their friendship was transforming into a very different type of action now. They met and laid out their plan. The well-traveled Booker T knew many people in the South, and he had a very large network of people who could assist him in identifying the type of people that Teddie wanted. His role was to identify candidates for federal offices who were native Southerners, who supported black rights, and they could be black or white, Republican or Democrat. Teddie didn't care. They wanted capable men of character. And Teddie trusted that Booker T could identify them, and there were immediate results. A new judge in Alabama who favored fair election laws and education for blacks, a new U.S. attorney in Alabama, and many others. Within a month, Booker T was back in Washington, D.C. This time, Teddie invited him to dinner at the White House with Mrs. Roosevelt, family, and another friend who Teddie hunted with. Teddie wanted some social time with Booker T before they retired to a meeting after dinner. The following day, the press discovered that something very unusual had happened in the White House. The president had invited a black man to have dinner with him, and this set off a firestorm in the South. The president was started off in the newspapers. The president was accused of an error of judgment, the greatest outrage, an insult to the nation, and on and on. And then the Northern press, in their response, and I quote from the New York Times, "The Southern papers are not well advised in their severe criticism of the president for inviting Dr. Washington to dinner at the White House. They sat down together on that occasion, two gentlemen, one white and one colored, who are the truest Americans born on our soil, two of the best and most intelligent and influential friends of the South living." But there was also a chorus of denunciations from the likes of Senator Ben Tillman and other Southern senators claiming this would result in violent reactions in the South. Later, Teddie realized he had made a political mistake. He still felt he had the right to invite whoever he wanted to dinner. And Booker T questioned, "Can I really tell the president I'm not going to accept his invitation?" Because he had been invited officially. But clearly their actions arising from their friendship were not having the desired effect, which was to draw white and black, rich and poor, north and south closer together. Teddie was puzzled and shocked by the reaction. Overnight, he had unintentionally made many enemies in the South. But he sent word to Booker T and said he didn't care. But his next appointment in positions in the South ran into stonewalling senators. Teddie had to resort to recess appointments over and over again. When it was widely recognized that Booker T was advising the president, this too became a political issue. Both the White House dinner and Booker T's influence with the president were being used by the Democrats in their campaigns for local, state, and national elections. They weathered the first storm in their friendship. What puzzled me, because I've read the story, is why didn't they regroup at this point and try to think of a different path to achieve their objectives? However, it's pretty well known that Teddie valued his ability to make quick decisions that were good decisions, and then to stick with them, as we shall shortly see. During Teddie's campaign for the next term to become president, Booker T advised him to steer clear of making any issue of the Southern question. He had already done enough to secure the black vote. Teddie won that presidential election in another landslide. One of his first actions of the new term was to visit Booker T in Alabama. He wanted to see for himself what his friend had created from scratch and pay his respects. During the first 25 years of Booker T founding the Tuskegee Institute, and this point, when Teddie visits, the enrollment at the Tuskegee Institute had grown from 30 to 1,500. The physical plant consisted now of 33 multi-story brick buildings. And the property had increased from nothing to over 2,200 acres, of which over 1,000 were being cultivated. And he had already amassed an endowment of over $1 million for the Institute. Roosevelt opened his remarks before a large crowd deep in the South by saying, "You can't be as much inspired by anything I may say as I have been inspired by what I have seen. Mr. Washington, it is a liberal education just to come here and see this great focus of civilization. While I have always stood for this institution, now I've seen it, I will stand for it forever." Friends for life. The biggest test of their friendship was just ahead, though. About a year into Teddie's second term, a battalion of black soldiers from the West was sent to Brownsville, Texas, to protect the border. The white townspeople were not happy about being their hosts. Even though the battalion had included veterans from the Spanish-American War, from the Sioux Wars, and 6 of the members had won the Medal of Honor. These soldiers, these black soldiers, first exposure, because they had been in the West, to Southern black code laws. Needless to say, the environment in Brownsville was uneasy. The Army post, Fort Brown, was on the edge of town. A serious incident occurred at midnight on August 13, 1906, as 20 shots or more rang out in the town of Brownsville. A white bartender was killed and a policeman was injured, was wounded. The townspeople claimed soldiers had snuck out of the fort and attacked the town. However, there were no witnesses to identify who did what. It might have involved some soldiers, but their officers suspected that the townspeople had staged this. Because after that incident, they brought all the soldiers out on the parade field and they were all there. They were all in the barracks. Regardless, the mayor demanded that there be an investigation and that the black soldiers were to blame. The incident made national news. Some papers claiming the soldiers had run them up, and other papers claiming they had been framed. The president ordered the War Department to conduct an investigation. The initial investigation found only circumstantial evidence, and it appeared that some of that was planned. But there was no conclusion. So the president sent a special IG to investigate the case. The soldiers were pulled out of Brownsville and sent to Oklahoma by this time. And the special IG jumped to the conclusion that there must have been some soldiers guilty, but none of the soldiers would admit to knowing anything about what had happened. So he claimed it was a conspiracy of silence. Teddie, believing the soldiers were sheltering their own, summoned Booker T to Washington, D.C. and let him know that he was going to dismiss the entire battalion except for the white officers. And they would be dishonorably discharged without a court-martial. He ignored Booker T's plea to please wait, as this would be a great blunder. Once again, Teddie had made his decision, and he would execute it. Never before or after has there been a case of mass punishment in the U.S. Army. His decision would draw another spotlight on the North-South divide. This time, the northern newspapers were irate at Teddie, and the southern newspapers were congratulating. Although strange, Booker T and Teddie did not give up on their friendship. A week after Teddie left office, Booker T invited him to join the board of trustees at the Tuskegee Institute, and Teddie accepted. Maybe friends for a lifetime. Booker T, referred to as the Wizard of Tuskegee, died at the age of 59. He actually worked himself to death. It was high blood pressure, hypertension, that they didn't understand at that time. And it was an early death. His open casket in Tuskegee Chapel was viewed by more than 20,000 people. Among them, admirers from the north who had made a long journey to pay their respects. Teddie paid his friend homage as the keynote speaker at the funeral, and then consulted with the board of directors in selecting the new president for the Institute. Tuskegee Institute remains today a legacy to Booker T. Washington. So why is this a compelling story? When I read this history book, or when I read any history, normally what I'm looking for is to understand the story of how we got from here and how we got from there to how we got to here, and what were all the pieces to this puzzle, and can I kind of put them together and have it make sense to me in my head? That's usually, and it's, to me, it's kind of comforting to be able to put those stories together and keep them in my head. But this book affected me in a different way. It actually, instead of making me comfortable at the end, it made me uncomfortable, because I had all these questions that I wanted to get answers to. And I still have a lot of those questions. As an example, did these very famous individuals form a friendship and set a very admirable goal that was unattainable? That's just an example. I'm going to get back to some more questions later. As for this book's place as an important addition to American history, but first of all, I'm going to say, to me, it's a personal decision on that. And here's why. My father-in-law was an agent in World War II. He flew 35 missions in B-24s out of Italy, bombing the Germans. Our family has a record of all 35 missions. Just one example. In his last mission, they bombed a marshalling yard in Austria. It was noted in the records of that mission that there were 3 Messerschmitt 109s observed over the target, but they were driven off by the P-51s. Who flew the P-51s? Yeah, the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen flew cover. So, I'm reading this story about Booker T. I understand about the Tuskegee Airmen. I had never thought about the fact that that all fit together. And they flew cover from the power. Now I'm married for 55 years. So it's personal to me. But I will say that I've read a lot about Teddie, and maybe I have read someplace about their friendship, but I didn't recall it. But there is no book that I know of that focuses so much on that relationship. So that's how I think it fits in American history. So now I would like to have a discussion with you. And how are we doing? Okay? I would like to have a discussion on this book. First of all, and I can ask what let me answer a few questions first, and then I'm going to start asking some questions. Questions? Yes, Tom.
I was fortunate enough to grow up about 30 minutes from Sagamore Hill, Teddy Roosevelt's home. And that was a really easy Sunday afternoon drive. And my dad heard Teddy Roosevelt speak. And my sister and I heard those stories. to talk about Roosevelt's love for our language, like Churchill, small words, small old words. But there's a phrase that Teddie used that has struck me as relevant today. The malefactors of great wealth. And I wonder how you think T.R. loved his sister, and his mother and wife who died the same day, in the same house. Think about it. How would he, or would he use that phrase today, insofar as it was the visit at that time? And a challenge. It's a little bit different, but it's a thought.
So yeah, repeat for me so I can repeat it to everyone else. What was the phrase?
Malefactors of great wealth.
Malefactors of great wealth. I mean, you know, Teddie put that, Teddie kept that in mind his whole political career. In the book, it talks about the fact that Teddie was elected at the age of 23 to the Assembly of New York. And of course his district is New York City. And he's a man of action. He gets out on the street and he finds out what's going on in the tenements, and he is flabbergasted at the difference between where he came from and the conditions his constituents were living in. And he committed then that he was going to make a difference there. That's all. I think it exists today, and I mean, it certainly exists today. I mean, it's got to be in places that we're probably not even aware of. So I do think it applies today. Other questions? Yes, Mike.
Well, first, I'd like to thank Marty and Pat, two old soldiers, for their service to our nation. Most for you, as I read the book, I was struck by the irony between Teddy Roosevelt and Beaufort. Teddie was born into a wealthy family. Every door opened for him. Beaufort was born a slave. Every door was closed to him, but he persevered. What do you think was Booker T's most significant accomplishment, and what was its effect?
So I'm going to repeat the question. So the real question was, what do I think was Booker T's biggest accomplishment and what was the effect? I would say that I would look at that kind of in two ways. I would say, one, what was his biggest accomplishment while he was alive? And the effect that he had while he was alive. He had formed this idea that success was having a positive effect for as many people as you could. And he created the Tuskegee Institute from nothing. And 25 years later, they've got an enrollment of 1,500. They're all black. And most of them are ex-slaves. He is creating for a large number of people who had hardly any opportunity, real opportunity. And a lot of those people became very wealthy. They graduated from Tuskegee Institute. They were experiencing the American dream. But, you know, I think it's the history is the biggest accomplishment. After I read the book, I was thinking, you know, the author had depicted the way he thought and his philosophy in a very positive way. And I was wondering, was it really like that? And it's in the book, it talks about his first autobiography, which I love, Up from Slavery. This is really impressive. I know, and it became a big hit right away. And I think, you know, something like, you know, what he left behind is his biggest accomplishment. Because you can read it and this applies today. This is very good reading for all of us, in my opinion. So, other questions? Okay. Yes.
I've read a number of other materials referred to when I was as the beginning of the end of the Republican support by the American Black community.
Yeah.
The beginning of the dividing points, the Republican Party is not fighting, not trying to everybody is supported by the civil rights. Was there anything discussed between people here?
That's a great question. So the question has to do with the fact that it has been noted that black support for the Republican Party began to change at this time in history, and it did. And I think not only did the Brownsville, you know, Teddie's decision for the Brownsville affair, that did affect it to begin with. But what happened later, and it is somewhat covered in this book, is, you know, Teddie didn't run again. He could have run again because he wasn't elected the first time. So he could have been elected a second time. But he decided to turn it over to Taft. And then Teddie went off hunting in Africa. And when he comes back, he's not happy with what he sees Taft doing. And so Teddie runs against Taft on the next election. And it results in Woodrow Wilson becoming president, who is a white racist, white supremacist, and views Born with the Birth of a Nation in the White House, which was a total racist film. And so, you know, a lot of people could become very unhappy with the fact that, you know, what Teddie did there and then what he did to the party. And, you know, and setting. And so you look at it and you say, here's what they wanted to achieve. They wanted to move things forward. And they ended up with Woodrow Wilson getting elected president. Backwards. And then, you know, got to overcome that.
Do you stand on government for the people, by the people, and how corporations following just a few corporations is not really governing for the people, by the people? Because that's what he said.
Well, Teddie was definitely for the people. He didn't. He wasn't against corporations, but he was a trust buster. I mean, he did not want the people controlling big corporations to mistreat their workers and to create unfair competition. So he was a reformer in that way. So
What does it mean for the people? Why, what does that mean? What does that mean? Can't hear you.
oh, I'm sorry. The question is what did for the people and by the people mean to Teddy Roosevelt? I don't know. I don't know if I didn't get from the book that he looked at things that way.
You have to be government, right? Was it for the people, by the people? You know what I mean? Like, you voted for me and I'm helping you guys just to this point. I'm not gonna listen to these two corporations.
He did. That's right, and that's what he did. I mean, and the question is, did he govern with a perspective of being for the people as opposed to for the corporations? Definitely. And to tell you, the reason he got nominated to be the vice president was to get him out of New York. The party wanted him. The party he wouldn't listen to party bosses. He was his own man. And he was not going to govern by what somebody else told him. He was going to govern by what he believed in, which was for the people, by the people. Does that answer the question? Okay, we have 5 more minutes. Here's the things that I want to dig into more for me. And here's one. Was Teddie coachable? Think of friendships. Certainly, Booker T knew. When Booker T worked really hard to build relationships in the South to protect the Institute. He was never political. He was totally apolitical. He got donations from white people. He got donations from black people. He had them all working together. So why, in their relationship, couldn't they do that better? Was Teddie coachable? Think about that in your friendships. How much do you listen? So that's just one of the questions that I've got that came out of this book. I know we're running out of time. If there's one last question, I'll take it. Yes, Ted. I'll take it.
What was the connection between Booker T. Washington, here, close to home, and the senator and the master?
And what?
And the master,
Yeah. Well, Booker T was educated at Hampton in Northern Virginia. He did come to Beaufort and to the Penn Center, and they were sharing information. But that's about all I know for sure about that. And the question was, what was the relationship with Booker T and our community here? Question there?
How old was Teddie when he died?
Teddie died several years later, after Booker T. He was 62, I think. Teddie had a bullet in him. It was an attempted assassination on him when he was running against Taft. It's probably complicated. They weren't able to find a bullet in it. And they think complications from that caused his death. Yes, please.
He also took that trip down.
Yeah, and he got pretty sick.
Wasn't a problem.
What do you get, malaria, right? Malaria?
Yes. Malaria.
Yeah, he got real sick in the Amazon. So he took a trip with 2 of his sons down to the Amazon. Yeah, I took 2 of them down to the Amazon. And Teddie lived to see one of his sons die in combat in World War I. Quick, the youngest. Yes.
I think it's interesting that both Roosevelts were seen as traitors of their own class.
Yeah.
Just kind of an irony there.
Yeah. Yes.
Actually, it's not a question about the book, but because there are so many questions about other parts of his life, I was just going to mention that there is an excellent three-part documentary on Netflix on Teddie.
Yeah, there's a three-part Netflix documentary on Teddy Roosevelt if anyone would like to watch it. It's really good because Doris Kearns is in it. Okay, we're wrapping up.